Maya Winkelstein is the Executive Director of Open Road Alliance, a private funder for the social space that thinks of themselves as investors for social impact. We discuss the unpredictable nature of the world and how the social sector operates in an even more unpredictable reality. She explains why man-made budget constraints can be more difficult to overcome than acts of God. We talk about working with the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable places, yet how NGOs feel compelled to offer guarantees. She makes a call to NGOs for more bravery and explains why no organization seeks funding from her unless they have a problem. Let's listen. And I'm here with Maya Winkelstein of the Open Road Alliance. And very happy you were able to join me today for the Failures from the Field podcast. As I mentioned to you, we are talking to development leaders about some relatively untold type of stories. We believe that the development sector is under a lot of pressure to produce results and great stories. And all of these things are very important to show our impact and to talk about the change we are making in the world. But most of us in this sector have some road that we followed to get here. And normally this type of road has some pitfalls and some downsides to it. And we're trying to expose our fellow development leaders and maybe some young people who want to get into the field to these stories because we think they could be quite helpful. So let me start though by asking you to just articulate a little bit, either on a personal level or an organizational level, what your mission is and how you see change in the world so we can know where you're going on this journey before we hear about the journey itself.
Absolutely. Open Road Alliance is a private funder in the social space. We are geographic and sector area agnostic. We are legal status agnostic, which means we support registered 501c3s as well as for-profit social entrepreneurs. What we are is investors for social impact. We deploy capital and we're looking to maximize our returns in the form of impact. We do that specifically through what for us is a leveraged model where we actually only provide funds when a project has hit one of those pitfalls, one of those roadblocks, one of those bumps along the way. And we do that for the simple reason that the world is unpredictable. The social sector is not immune to this. And in fact, when you're working with the most vulnerable populations in the most vulnerable places of the world, which the social sector by definition does, it actually follows that the world is more unpredictable. And yet, the way that our sector has often constructed the narrative and specifically constructed the financing agreements, there's no space in that moment of to pivot and to have access to the resources necessary to solve the problem so you can keep moving forward. So Open Road does that. We'll come in at those moments, and that's what we do and why we do it.
Phenomenal. So maybe building off of the back of that, you could talk a bit about one of these roadblocks that you've seen and possibly a pivot that was informed by the challenge the organization faced and by your funding.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad to be participating in this podcast today, and thank you for inviting us because problems, failure, that's what we do. Right, 100% of our portfolio is in that space. We often say, nobody's coming to us unless they have a problem. So we hear a lot of really extraordinary stories. And the types of problems that our portfolio encountered are really varied, as you might imagine. There are certainly those stories of acts of God, weather-related events, so the flood that came during the dry season and washed out the partially built road. But the most interesting situations for me are the projects where the roadblock is caused by an act of man, if you will. For example, we have one project that was working with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. This was a very well-known international organization that had decades of experience doing this type of work. was invited by the UN Refugee Agency to expand their work in Lebanon in response to the crisis, was awarded a grant to do this, and then after the grant was awarded was told that, oh, you know, we're going to actually put salary caps on how much you can pay the staff, which was less than what the staff were being paid. So now this organization is facing this conundrum where they know exactly how to do the work. They can do the work. They have a proven model to successfully do the work. They have staff in place to do the work. But to do the work, they're either going to have to issue pay cuts to their staff or turn down this opportunity to expand their work and have greater impact. Situations like that, unfortunately, happen over and over throughout the sector, and to us it just doesn't make sense. So those are some moments where we'll intercede and help solve the problem.
Sure. So obviously you guys go out there and attack failure and look at that. Do you ever have trouble explaining this to an external audience who wants to measure your success, and how do you go about doing that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting. When grantees or potential grantees come to us, they're coming to us, there's always two things that are true about everyone. They have a problem, and they have someone who's already invested a lot of time and money into the project. There is already a funder on the table. People aren't coming to us with pilot projects or new ideas. They're already mid-implementation. And so one of the first questions we always ask is, well, have you gone back to the original funder and told them about this problem and then asked them to help? I mean, they're the ones who are already invested in the theoretical success of this endeavor. And very often the answer we get is no. And so our follow-up is, well, why? And the answer they give us time and time again is, we're afraid. We are afraid to go back to the funder that we spent 9 months talking to, convincing this was a good idea to invest in, that has $1 million at stake essentially for the success of this project, but we're afraid to say anything because it's going to be seen as our fault. It's going to be seen as a failure. It's going to be interpreted as incompetence, even though the challenge I'm facing is an out-of-season flood. Obviously did not make that happen yourself. Could not have avoided, has nothing to do actually with the competency of the implementer, but this expectation and view that in the social sector, because it's philanthropic dollars, there should be no risk. It's almost as if NGOs feel compelled to offer guarantees, funders demand guarantees, and then when reality kicks in, there's nothing left to do except be disappointed.
So in your experience in dealing as this secondary funder, so to speak, the one who comes in, what advice would you give primary funders in building this relationship early on that could actually translate into a better funder-grantee relationship?
Absolutely. It's a great question. We actually conducted a 400 respondent survey earlier this summer, 200 funders, 200 NGOs, random sample throughout the sector to get a better understanding on what was and what wasn't being done. And there were some very simple things that we found were not being done. We found that 76% of funders do not ask during the RFP process in written or verbal form what could go wrong that might require additional funding. And as an NGO, if you're not being asked, you're certainly not going to volunteer that information. So right there is a very easy thing that we can do at the onset, not only to identify potential risks that maybe could be mitigated and therefore avoided altogether, but to also start and open the conversation so that fear that might happen afterwards isn't there. Another thing that we found from the survey is that 67% of funders said they do have financial capacity to respond to these types of problems off-cycle, mid-implementation, but only 13% of them budget for it. And as we all know, whatever organization you're working in, that difference between, oh yeah, there's money in the bank, but if it's not in my budget, it doesn't count. So that's another very easy place that I think both funders and NGOs, to be honest, can begin to build into the structure this greater tolerance, acceptance, and just awareness and honesty around the potential risks that are inherent in any project.
So if the Open Road Alliance could appeal to another Open Road Alliance, meaning if you had the assistance of somebody else to solve any problem in what you guys do, what would you go to the Open Road Alliance for?
Oh, that's such a great question. For us, it is like any investor, we struggle with a scarcity of resources question and an opportunity cost question. And like every funder, one of the ways to deal with that is you develop a set of criteria in order to keep yourself focused and to give yourself an excuse or a reason to say no. But there are many projects that come through our doors which don't fit our precise criteria, but are still incredibly worthy projects that have encountered an unexpected roadblock for which there is a discrete solution. And if I could wave my magic wand, so to speak, I would love to have other peers in the space join us within their own portfolio or on a more broad base, so that the projects that Open Road has to say no to for the sake of internal rigor have another open road to go to and don't have to fall apart for lack of funding.
And so in dealing with what you guys deal with and going in and trying to fill the gaps, you've probably seen so many reasons why these important projects face these gaps. So it seems to me you guys will have a wealth of knowledge about potential gaps and problems in funding and programs and implementation. So you're here at CGI, and imagine you had a venue right to the top or a voice right to the top. What problem would you like to see solved? What would you be the most passionate advocate for at such a substantial gathering?
It's always hard to pick one bullet point because there's 10 and you actually need all 10 to make the ecosystem work. But if I'm forced to sort of focus on one, it's communication. Communication and transparency in communication between the two sides of the relationship, in that funder-grantee relationship. We spend a lot of our time, in addition to making investments, talking with funders, talking with NGOs, learning about, as you said, these types of problems. We are working on putting together a taxonomy of challenges so people can understand where they fit, understand that this is a systemic issue. If you know, hey, these are the 3 most common challenges that health projects in sub-Saharan Africa face, that then becomes data that is not project specific, it's sector specific, which can hopefully change the conversation. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have data. It doesn't matter if the funder does ask that question in the RFP or does set aside 10% of their budget for contingencies. A funder can't help with a problem they don't know exists. And an NGO can't be expected to communicate to a funder that they don't know if the funder wants to even hear from them. So at the core of all of the numbers and all of the policies and procedures and things we can do better, it comes down to communication. And if there's one thing I would ask for funders to be more deliberately solicitous of the good, bad, and ugly, and for NGOs to have a little more courage and bravery to have those risky and difficult conversations and raise your hand so we're not setting expectations on the wrong foot to begin with.
Well, thank you so much, Maya, for joining me. That was really wonderful and I think very insightful, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.